Right, it's 3 o'clock, so let's go ahead and start. And let me say a few introductory words, and then I'm really going to turn it on. I'm David Smith. I'm president of the Forge Center. On behalf of our board and staff, welcome. Since the start of the corona pandemic and the move to virtual programming, we have made a concerted effort to continue to offer relevant and timely programs for the humanitarian and emergency management communities. In April 2020, we launched Forge Center Conversations as an opportunity to discuss issues relevant for our work. This is our 6th one-hour webinar and the first in 2021. You can visit our website, www.forgecenter.org, to see other topics and listen to archived programs. We have covered various topics, including cultural competencies, making social and political change, careers, peer relationships, and practices for developing good programming. We will continue to offer programming in this way for the rest of the year. We are hoping that later this year, we will be able to once again offer face-to-face experiential-based exercises at our training site in Swanton, Maryland. We are being cautious, of course, and will only host a program once we feel it would be safe for our participants and role players. If you have any questions about our programming, reach out to me at david@forgecenter.org. Now for our program today. We are in a period of increasing need to respond to natural and man-made disasters, requiring emergency management and humanitarian responses. In the US in particular, climate change has resulted in more frequent situations of serious flooding and wildfires, all demanding professionals to respond not only to the causes, but the effects, including dealing with displacement and local residents. And globally, we continue to see conflict, natural disasters, and public health situations requiring populations to move under challenging conditions. The field of emergency management, though active for many years, has traditionally been a field dominated by men, often coming from law enforcement, fire and rescue, and military fields. Women who choose the field can be faced with obstacles and challenges to advancement. In today's program, we want to explore the role of women through the experiences of 3 female emergency management and humanitarian professionals. Our moderator today is Chelsea Cornwell, who holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Connecticut and a master's in disaster resilience leadership from Tulane University. She is currently working as a lead clinician with juveniles in a residential treatment program to address inappropriate sexual behaviors and other mental health needs. Her professional background includes working as a sexual assault victim advocate, AmeriCorps member serving in educational groups for youth, and interning as an NGO representative to the United Nations on behalf of the International Association of Schools of Social Work. Chelsea came to the Forge Center as a program participant in 2016 and joined the program staff in 2017. I am now going to turn it over to Chelsea to introduce our guests and to start the conversation. Before I start, though, I want to remind everyone that this is being recorded, and once it is completed, it will be posted online. Questions should be posted only in the question and answer box and will be shared with the speakers after their initial conversation. The chat box, I do want you to use, though, also as a way of networking, providing information, talking about your programs, introducing yourself, but only use the chat box for Q&A. I will return about 5 minutes before 4 p.m. Eastern time to close the program out. So Chelsea, I turn it over to you.
All right, thanks so much, David. So I am here to introduce and facilitate conversation really between Anna and Shayle. The 3 of us attended Tulane together in the Disaster Resiliency Leadership Program. And we have maintained a really close friendship, even though we're separated in 3 different time zones. We try to meet up once a year to go backpacking and talk about, how we're doing in the field. And so I'll first turn it over to Anna to introduce herself, give a little description about what she is working on. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. I'm Anna Feigum. I work for the state of Oregon in emergency management. So this is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to try to be succinct and as clear as I can about what I do. I'm currently on a job rotation with the Oregon Office of Emergency Management. So what that means is I'm the Deputy State Hazard Mitigation Officer, took over I'm covering down on the State Hazard Mitigation Officer who was out on leave. So we manage the pre and post disaster grant programs. So managing the flow of funds from FEMA down to local entities who are applying for these funds. So that includes, technical assistance, outreach, all of that stuff. Last fall, we had the worst wildfire we've ever had in Oregon, and have received a ton of FEMA assistance in terms of recovery as well as hazard mitigation funds. So managing that as well as all the other grant programs that we have has been a heavy load. But prior to this, I came on the beginning of the year to help out with this at OEM. But prior to this, for 3.5 years, I had been with the Oregon Oregon Department of Human Services in the Emergency Management Unit. My responsibilities were pretty great. So I had some internal and external responsibilities. Internally, I did a lot of emergency planning, disaster planning with our employees, as well as our consumers, including our foster families, as well as managing the continuity of operations for the entire agency. Externally, every state has a state emergency operations plan, and in that plan, it delegates responsibilities to different state agencies for different parts of the response and recovery for major emergencies and disasters. The Oregon Department of Human Services is responsible for mass care and food and water, which is sheltering, emergency assistance, anything that kind of sustains life. So I did a lot of the mass care planning for the state of Oregon, which included a shelter support plan, emergency repatriation, family reunification, and feeding. And as well as responding to a plethora of emergencies throughout the 3.5 years. So I think I'll stop there. That's a lot of information, but back to you, Chelsea.
Thanks, Anna. And then, so Anna is in Portland, Oregon, and Shayle is located in Colorado. So Shayle, can you give us a little description about your background?
Sure. So my name is Shayle Sabo. As Chelsea mentioned, I live here in Colorado. Our office is out of Fort Collins, Colorado, and I work at the local level. So I work for a county agency. So I too kind of have a path in my career here so far. So when I first started in emergency management, I was a program manager for a program that we call Larimer Connects. It's Larimer County. And really the purpose of that program was to foster grassroots neighbor to neighbor connection building, capacity building in the community, and resilience long-term. I'm also an emergency management coordinator, which looks at doing a lot of the traditional emergency management work. So training, exercises, responding to disasters, all of the above. And I am also a planning section chief in our emergency operations center during times of disaster. So I do a lot of the consequence management planning, making sure we're looking long-term, and developing a plan that we all work off of. And then most recently, at the end of the year, I have been appointed as the recovery manager for the COVID pandemic here locally for the county, which is a whole new experience in and of itself.
So you guys are both like pretty much you're in early stages of your careers. What has that journey been like for you? And I live on Main Street, so I'm very sorry about the traffic. But
I'll start, I guess. So for me, it's been a steep learning curve. We came from a program that was highly theoretical, and translating the theoretical to practical has been a learning experience. Luckily, I've had some people who have really taken upon themselves to help me understand that transition, or how you write plans in a practical sense. I, for one, like to write in passive language. That is something I've nipped in the bud. Additionally, working for the state government, I've had to, learn about some of the barriers that you can face in terms of trying to advance resiliency with people, including the political atmosphere, gatekeepers that might exist within your agency or within the state that can kind of derail or slow down progress that you think needs to be made. So there's a lot of patience that needs to be taken into account here. You're slowly moving the needle, and sometimes it feels like you're going a little bit backwards. But so that patience, I think, has been really important for me to learn. And I think I've just really learned how important it is to seek out mentors in the field. I've had people who've been in the field for a while, particularly women, who have really guided me through some skills and built those skills within me so I could be successful in the field.
And what about for you, Shayle?
Yeah, so same for me. It's incredible to think that it's only been 4 years, because it just feels like a massive amount of stuff has happened in the 4 years, including, like Anna, we dealt with the largest wildfire in Colorado history here in our own county just this year on top of COVID. And if you had told me at the beginning of my career that by year 4, I would be dealing with a pandemic and the largest fire in Colorado history at the same time, I would have thought, no way, that's what you hear about in disaster movies, and that's not real. But I would say I feel fortunate in my career path to be working at the local level, because of the fact that I feel like I have a lot of opportunity to kind of be able to learn cross-disciplinarily. I learn a lot of different pieces of the sector and how everything interconnects. And like Anna, I work directly for a female emergency manager, and I've been very fortunate in that she's a fantastic mentor. She's very well connected in the emergency management community. And where I am locally, we actually have a lot of female emergency managers. So I've had a lot of guidance and leadership in that way on how to move forward, not only as a young person, but as a female in this field that is evolving as we speak. But that being said, too, it can be kind of overwhelming at times, because of the fact that when you are at the local level, you do have to become kind of a jack of all trades and learn multiple things at once. And sometimes it just feels like like you never have enough time to learn everything that is needed. And my direct supervisor has, I think she said 30 years in this field, and so things like imposter syndrome and stuff like that seeps in, where I'm like, how am I ever going to get to her level? She just knows everything. And, I took a recovery training, a female level recovery training just a few months ago, and she was directly named in a case study. So she's well known in the nation. So that definitely does play into it. But I would just say, an opportunity to continue to learn. It's never boring. No 2 days are the same.
And I want to say, I think it's pretty interesting. Shayle and I have a lot of conversations about what we do respectively, and the difference between working at the state and working at the local level. While she says she's a jack of all trades, I've really kind of focused in on one specific part of the response and recovery, mass care and social services. So I know a lot about that field and sort of how, the interconnectivity of all these, of the wide, scope of a disaster and response and recovery. But I also really, at the state, really enjoy being able to connect with all the different county emergency managers. Each county is different. Obviously, probably within every state, you're going to get rural, urban, different thoughts about the government, different needs. Some counties, like in Multnomah County, where Portland is, they have a ton of resources. They get a lot of the funding. And then you have counties that their emergency managers, they're also their sheriff, and it's like a one-person show. So being able to understand the differences in what each county needs and the support for each county, I think, has been really valuable for me at the state. So I don't know, Shayle, if you want to comment on anything else about the local level that you enjoy.
Yeah, so I do think that if you're somebody who wants to really specialize in the field and have a very distinct kind of career path, the state and federal levels do offer that opportunity more for you. And then in a way, there's pros and cons to that at the local level, the jack of all trades thing, because in a way it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to be like, what do I really want to do in this field? Because I feel like I get to try a little bit of it every day, but it does make it hard to know what is it that I really want to do? Where do I want to continue to advance my career? But at the same time, at the local level, one thing that I really like about it is I directly know my community very, very well. I'm out in the community all the time. I get to know all of the people here on a more personal level. Whereas at the state level, you can be kind of sporadic around. You get to know people, but not to the depth I feel like you would at the local level, where the people you work with are your actual neighbors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you definitely have a 30,000 foot view at the state level, which I actually enjoy. I like having that overarching. I don't like getting too deep into the details. And people like Shayle who like doing that are better suited for those positions.
You both kind of mentioned women as being an important part of your growth and career? And I know that we talk a lot about, Anna, your interactions with women in the field versus Shayle's interactions with women in the field. Shayle, you're in a position where you have a lot of other females involved in emergency management, and Anna, your experience has been very different than that. So how has that affected, your ability to do your job, confidence in emergency management? Yeah, Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, so Shayle mentioned that her direct boss is a female. Mine, when I started out, was a male. Just differences in how we approached just our skill set. I'm more of a soft. I like to learn from other people. I don't want to come off as seeming like I know everything when I don't. And I felt like I was lacking some of that guidance on how to become more of a confident individual while also being recognized for the skills and very positive skills that I possess. I actually had to seek out females within emergency management who have had a lot of experience to give me that confidence boost that I do know what I'm talking about. And just because I, maybe don't exhibit these skills like men do, or I'm generalizing here, like men do, or people who come from a military background, that having a softer sort of front is actually a skill set in its own right. So I've really appreciated, since then I've really built a network of female emergency managers around me. And typically, very often I go to that group of women to kind of talk to them about certain issues I'm having. And very often we have all very similar experiences and can kind of talk through how we should approach some of these concerns in the future. So I found it very valuable to reach out to the network that is within the state emergency management system. And I've really appreciated and valued those relationships with the women.
And Shayle, you've talked a lot about feeling very mentored as a young professional, like by your team and your network.
Yeah, I have been extremely fortunate, and I almost realized how much I took it for granted and didn't even realize how much of an anomaly it is until I've had conversations with folks like Anna or people from outside of my little Larimer County bubble, because even at Larimer County, outside of emergency management, our county manager is female, our assistant county manager is female. We just elected 2 female commissioners, so 2 out of the 3 are female. And when I have a meeting, even with emergency management partners, not just emergency management alone, but a lot of the folks in the room, there's a good balance between male and female. And so I've never really felt that I wasn't having my voice heard because of the fact that it was based on gender or any of that. Really, where I guess I've run into that wall a little bit is, look at my face. I look like I'm 12. I'm newer in the career. And so I feel like if I've not felt heard or had my opinions discounted or anything like that, it's been more based on my age and my newness to the field and my experience level being judged over my gender. But it is a very interesting dynamic. And I can think of a training that I went to a couple years ago where we had to do role playing. We were doing a training around being an exercise director and doing a training like that. And I was told to speak with authority, but when I did so, people made fun and said that primarily men were making fun and saying that I was using my mom voice. And that was a very frustrating experience because obviously that wouldn't have been used or that terminology or that language wouldn't have been used in another situation. So I have experienced it some, but definitely I've been fortunate in that I have had a great circle of women to learn from.
Yeah, and I feel like I had similar experiences as Shayle, and I feel like there's this unspoken camaraderie between women. There have been times where, you lock eyes with a woman across the room and that both of you are seeing the same thing, which is great. And I really want us to take that camaraderie and that supportive, looks across the table and really put it to language, because I think that without saying something, we're just letting that perpetuate. And I have taken it upon myself to stand up in certain situations and have seen sort of like this a change within some of the women around me who typically would say that's just the way that he is, that's just the way that it is, which I refuse to accept. And so I've really appreciated the women who tell me, I'm really glad you spoke up about that, and I really want to be there to support you and do similar things. So I think that's been really valuable for me as well.
In what ways do you feel like you are bringing leadership to some of that work around equity, whether within gender or other intersectional, equity, diversity issues?
Yeah, I mean, I can go ahead and start with that. So just to kind of touch on what Anna was talking about the camaraderie, emergency management can be a difficult field to get into. It's been referred to as one of those, it's who you know fields. And so something that I'm very passionate about is helping the next generation get their foot in the door here. So I really like to take time to work with students or work with people who are interested in being in this field, particularly young people and particularly young women, to make sure that I'm using my position in a way that I can help encourage and pave that path forward for others. As far as the equity space, I've really gotten into this work with recovery, and I don't know if any of you have read the book Emergent Strategies. I haven't read it either, but there's a model that is used in that book that was presented to me as we started beginning more equity focused work on how do we build systems in which privileged support elevates impacted community members. And so what we are doing in recovery is we have a triple bottom line focus in recovery. So that's looking at social equity, protecting the environment, and economic development. And that's our core philosophy of everything we do. But we also stood up a recovery advisory board made up of community members and community rooted organizations to help us have that conversation around equity and where we can improve, and how do we, instead of it being a one-sided conversation of you tell us what we need, how do we work together and make this a partnership versus, government seeking what information they can get and then just not ever doing anything with it. And so what I really like about the concept of privileged support is it's time for people like me to sit down and listen and allow the community to continue to move this work forward in a way that makes sense for the community. And I should be there to provide support. So I have access to government resources. I have access to technical expertise. I have all of that. How do I, as in my position as government, as an institution, help the community have the capacity that they need to move work forward? So I could go off about that forever, but I know we have a short amount of time. But that's one thing I'm doing is I think I feel weird saying that I'm taking a leadership role when it's really the community should be the leader. I should be the support system.
I imagine you have a lot to navigate and probably some pushback from being vocal about having that focus.
Yeah, so something I'm kind of starting to see in this space is and especially at the institutional level, there's an emotional charge almost that feels like around even the term equity. And because of everything that's going on at the societal level and all of that, even when you bring up the term, it immediately you can feel tension in the room. And I think it's really that we have a hard time admitting where we're making mistakes. We want to people do good things, right? We want to be seen as doing good, but we have a hard time admitting where we're doing or we're making mistakes or maybe not doing enough. And so I think that's where the culture shift needs to happen, is we need to be able to stand up and say, we're not doing enough. We need to do better. That's okay. It's okay that we make mistakes. It's okay that we know this now, but until we're able to actually acknowledge that and look it in the face, how are we going to move forward? Because you can't solve a problem if you're not willing to admit that it's there.
And that really touches on a lot, I think, that in conversations that we've had before. Anna, you especially always talk about what is the definition of confidence and who is defining the term confidence. So can you speak a little bit to how that relates to you or how you see that?
About the confidence or the equity piece?
Let's do the confidence first, and then we'll circle back to the equity piece.
I mean, I kind of alluded to it a little bit before, but you know, whose definition are we using? I think that there's not necessarily a set definition for the word confidence. It can be expressed in different ways, and it's kind of on the person receiving it to kind of you know, see it or not see it. Like I said before, I'm more of a person that'll ask others for their opinions. I won't shut people down. I want them to talk. I want them to come back and engage with me. But I know others who will say, you know, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to make something up. I've been told if you don't know the answer, Anna, make it up. Make it sound like you know what you're talking about. And I actually refuse to do that. And if someone doesn't see that as confidence, then I'm okay with that. You know, like I am true to who I am, and the fact that people should have voices, and whether or not I disagree with what they're saying, I want them to have that seat at the table. I want them to have that voice at the table. I know Shayle had said something the other day about not just giving people a seat, but giving them a voice and letting them have their voice at the table and listening.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about too, confidence, you know, the type of confidence that people have been projecting onto you, telling you that you don't have confidence if you don't know the answer. It's a whole different ball game to have confidence to admit that you don't know the answer. And that seems to be way more effective when we're talking about putting communities in positions of power and people who have been, you know, pushed to the side and not given a voice. And that, I know that you have really focused on that also through your equity work, is pointing out that people are not represented. And that takes a lot of confidence as well. So can you, this is kind of circling back to the equity part. How has your leadership and confidence been involved with your equity work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a secret to anybody here that emergency management, particularly at the policy level, is very white, male-dominated, military-dominated, you know, representation. There are a lot of areas that the activities that we engage in are for able-bodied people, for white people, for men, and being able to bring that perspective. And the only way that you're going to be able to bring that and really understand that perspective is having the right people in the space, having the space to influence that policy. Me personally, at the Oregon Department of Human Services, I helped found and co-led the Disability Emergency Management Advisory Council. A lot of states have disability advisory councils that engage with emergency management. We really, you know, we understand that there needs to be a greater access and functional needs focus to emergency management here in Oregon, but wanting to bite off small chunks here and there, we decided to start with the disability community. So we founded this advisory council, and really the purpose of this was to get the disability community's input into what we're doing in emergency management. Are our plans inclusive of all people with disabilities? Not just taking this plan and being like, here, review this plan for us, but actually involving them in the creation of this plan. As we've seen through COVID, you know, one of the major things was communication. Are there sign language interpreters available at every press conference? We got a lot of comments about that in Oregon, even with the governor and with local press conferences. And that's one thing with the DMAC, we call them. We really tried to push through the state agencies and into the governor's office that there needs to be a sign language interpreter. We can provide that. You know, just let us know that is what you need. But they don't know what they don't know. So these people that are you know, organizing these press conferences, I'm fairly certain that they're able-bodied. So it's like you need to know what the needs are, and the only way to do that is having the people have an inclusive, you know, inclusivity in that space. So it's been really rewarding in that regard, and I think we're moving the dial in the right direction. Clearly, we have a lot of you know, a lot of work to do. And as Shayle said, I think there it's a lot of just words at this point. Equity, people like to throw around the word equity. I, as a co-lead for the Disability Emergency Management Advisory Council, know that I am not the person who should be co-leading the Disability Emergency Management Advisory Council. I am an able-bodied person, and I want to be able, even though I created this, I want to be able to pass this off to and give the responsibility to someone who has a disability and can actually influence policy because they have lived experience.
Thank you both so much for your answers on that. I'm going to take some questions from the Q&A. And if you, either one of you, feel like you have a response to that, just go ahead and jump in. So the first one from Caitlin. Do you see peers of the opposite sex who are around the same age with similar levels of experience being treated as you are? And does that challenge your concept of age versus gender treatment?
I have seen many instances where men of my age and even have less experience get more acknowledgement from other men emergency managers. I've joked with my female colleagues that I need to carry on my resume with me. And I actually kind of went through a salary evaluation because this white man, same age as me, actually younger than me, less experience in the field, was getting paid more than I was. So this has been something that I've noticed. It's almost like they don't need to prove anything. I need to prove myself, but they don't need to prove anything. And so that's what I've noticed within the state government where I've worked.
Yeah, I would say my experience has been similar in that I feel like it takes more for me to prove myself and my qualifications in the room more than it does for the men. I also think a challenge you come up against is it seems like it's really easy for men to have things like a command presence or like a leadership presence. But if you as a woman express your tone in the same way, you have, or try to express that leadership, you're either seen as having a mom voice, which obviously I still, I guess I haven't gotten over that. You're either seen as having that, or you're seen as being aggressive or overly emotional, or you have all these other kind of adjectives tied to your tone than are being actually exhibited. And I don't feel like, if a man is expressing frustration or something like that, I don't feel like they get tagged with being overly emotional or overly aggressive in the way that women might.
And how have the two of you kind of dealt with those comments directed towards you on a personal level? How do you deal with those comments?
It's a good question.
It is a good question.
And that might be a little too personal, but like this is something that women face in a lot of different fields. So what are the strategies or techniques that you engage with to help keep yourself from kind of being gaslit by that message?
Yeah, I try to address it. I think I've gotten more confident in that I can address it. And if they have a negative opinion of me because I'm addressing the way that they're speaking to me, that's on them. That's a really hard thing to do, especially in a workplace where you have to engage with these people, and you don't want to, ruin your rapport with them, or even if it is on them. So I think it is like kind of you're weighing I feel like you're always weighing the pros and cons of is this worth standing up for this or is it not? I think it's easier when you have other women backing you up in what you're saying. A lot of the times I go to women who have been in the room and ask them what their thoughts are on it, just to make sure that I'm, seeing it clearly, or I'm not, caught up in something where it wasn't that big of a deal, for sort of that validation, and then go address it once I have that validation that yes, other people actually did notice this as well.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting point, Anna, that you make is when I feel like I've experienced that too. I almost feel like I have to seek out, am I being overly or like over analyzing this, or did I actually experience that? Which I feel like is an interesting thing that we feel like we have to kind of seek that out. And I do feel like that's the way, when that particular situation happened, there was camaraderie between the other women in the training that all said, hey, that I don't feel like that was appropriate. And we really just kind of handled it by, you know, you can leave a review of the instructor and stuff, but it kind of does, I guess it does kind of come down to where you were picking your battles. I probably would have made a bigger deal about it if it wasn't like oh, this is a training that I'm done doing and then I'm never going to see this person again. But I did want to make sure that it was documented. But I just do think it's very interesting that it feels like we kind of seek that out and see and build on that with each other, I guess, and seek that kind of team membership.
And that
Yeah,
kind of
I feel like it can feel like you're getting gaslit a little bit or a lot of bit when you bring something up and they tell you it's not a big deal. That's happened to me a number of times. Instead of kind of just talking through with me, you know, how I'd like to be engaged differently or whatnot. I kind of get this defensive, like, this isn't what actually happened. So that for me is kind of a trigger for me. I don't like feeling like I'm being gaslit or like my feelings don't matter in you know, the grand scheme of the situation. So I think that I really try to weigh the situation and see if I can actually handle it emotionally going into it. So
yeah. And that kind of brings us to another question that was posed by one of the attendees. Do you have advice on how to seek out mentors from others in the field or in your workspace?
I mean,
good question. Go ahead, Shayle.
I was gonna say, I'll probably turn that one over to Anna because like I said, I kind of took it for granted. I have women in my space a lot. But I will say, like, you know, at conferences and in trainings, it is a really good opportunity to network with other people. Emergency management, yes, it's a big field, but I kind of refer to it as a small family field also, because you get to see the same people from all over the state all the time. And then there's like the International Emergency Management Association and even people from across the country you run into pretty frequently. You wouldn't think so, but I would say networking wherever you can. And for people who are very introverted like me, I know that makes you cringe, but that's, I guess, the best advice I would give is seek out those that you find commonality with in those trainings or when you attend other events outside of your agency as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm just thinking about the two female mentors that I have. One used to work for the Oregon Office of Emergency Management as the private public partnership. And I believe I saw her at a conference, and I just asked if I could connect with her, have lunch with her, ask her about her experiences. Then it kind of just evolved into a natural mentorship, where now I kind of talk to her about these concerns that I'm having, or these, you know, struggles that I have about being a female in the field. And, you know, now she has developed a similar women in emergency management group in Oregon, which I'm now a part of. And it's become like a really great environment for me just to hear. And a lot of these women are a little bit older, have been in the field for a long time, hearing that this is not, you know, it's not just me, they've struggled with this for a very long time, and wanting to make it, you know, continue to move that needle to support women coming into this field as well. The other mentor that I have actually works for FEMA. She's someone that I have worked on a lot with the plans that I was developing here in Oregon. So that, again, it was sort of like you have been in this field a long time, very knowledgeable, very supportive, just in general, my planning endeavors. Hey, do you want to get a cup of coffee, or do you want to just have a chat about some of the struggles I'm having? And they kind of naturally developed. So yeah, looking to who, you know, what feels safe for you. I feel like it's kind of natural to kind of feel out, and you see who kind of feels natural to you, who feels like safe for you to express some of those feelings. Because I know that there are women, and I think when you get into positions or into a field where it's very male dominated, very military dominated, you have to kind of take on, or it's easy to take on the characteristics of people in the field, of the dominant group, just to be able to sustain yourself. And I think that, you know, when you go against that, it wears on you a little bit. And I've definitely felt that over the past few years, where it's like, is this worth it? I'm, you know, exhausted, but I'm also fighting to move this needle for other people. So I think you gotta just like feel it out, and who's receptive to that, and who's, just going with the status quo to advance themselves because out of necessity.
And another question from our group or our attendees, this comes from the males in the room. A couple of them have asked, what can a male do who works in this male-dominated field do to help promote equity amongst men and women?
Yeah, so that was actually something I've been thinking about and I've been wanting to mention throughout this conversation is some of my support system has been some really incredible males that have stepped in and said, hey, I want to be better in this space, or have stood up and said, like things that are said are not okay or whatever. And another thing in Larimer County too is it's just a very strong culture of collaboration here, which again it's a thing that I kind of took for granted that I realize I'm so grateful for now. But there is a culture of we all are here to be on the same team and we're all here to support one another. And I think that root culture is really important. But I guess I would say one thing that I really appreciate about my coworkers that that are male is that if somebody will come to them, we notice this actually a lot kind of with older generations, that they will see a male name like on our website and just call that person for questions, regardless of what their position or title says or anything like that. And so instead of just always taking those questions or always assuming that role, they will do a good job of delegating, be like, no, Shayle's actually the specialist in this area, or our other female coworker is actually the specialist in this area. And we'll delegate that and make sure that we are being utilized for our expertise in the best way, versus them just kind of assuming the role and answering all of the questions and being seen as that person, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not working per se in emergency management at the moment, but we've all experienced, gender dynamics in our workplaces and in our experiences. And I think for me, one way that men have really helped support, women in the workplace, but I think has been to just open up the conversation and make yourself a safe person to validate and to feel like there's an atmosphere of trust there, that your experiences are real and they accept that your perspective is valid as well. So I think direct advice to males who want to be stronger allies and advocates for women in their offices can work to just seek out, to ask how how the other women are experiencing the meetings, the atmosphere, the culture.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's exactly what I would say as well. I'm not expecting, men to see everything how I see it, but kind of being open if it's something feels off to you or feel like, hey, that was a little, they didn't listen to what she said, or, follow up with that person afterwards and just say, hey, I noticed this, like, did that bother you? What can I do to support you in the next meeting if that happens?
So I'm going to return to more questions from our participants. This is redirecting it a little bit and asking about, have you had any experiences where things did not work out because disasters and emergencies have so many moving parts and can be so chaotic? Have you had experiences where things don't work out, and how did you handle or work through that?
I am here to tell you that is going to happen during a disaster. So this is something I feel very passionate about because I've seen it play out. But the more that you can do before the disaster, as far as relationships buildings and outreach to your community, your education, all of that, the more you do that ahead of time, the better it's going to play out for you in the disaster. And so an example of that, bringing it back to kind of the equity conversation, is we do a lot of preparedness outreach, but were we doing it in Spanish language, or were we doing specific preparedness trainings for people who do not speak English, all of that. And so when we had our evacuation, we hit worst case scenario where we had to evacuate Estes Park, which is a very diverse community. And we found out after the fact that people who were not, who did not speak English were actually sleeping in their cars for a week or two and not utilizing the free shelter that the Red Cross had stood up. And a lot of that is because there was fear. And it wasn't until there was word of mouth that the shelters are a neutral, safe place to be. They don't cost money. That's when people started coming into the shelter. But it shows that we didn't do our due diligence in doing education ahead of time before the event to make sure that we knew that people were able to get out and utilize the shelters effectively. So had we done that in the beginning, I think it would have played out a lot differently. But at the end of the day too, I think it's important to have compassion for yourself in a disaster situation, because it's going to happen. There's going to be mistakes that are made, but you know what? When you're in the middle of it, you're getting information left and right, and it's fast moving. It's a high stress environment, and you are asked to make decisions with very little information, with very little time, and you do the best you can. But that's why it's important to do things like after action reviews and work with all of your partners and have those collaborative relationships, because that's where you learn. And what frustrates me is when you don't actually learn from the lesson and you continue the cycle. That's where I think there's an issue. But if you do your due diligence and try to make sure that you are learning from the lessons that you embark on, then I think that's what's important. But I don't know if Anna wants to add anything to that, but just know that it's going to happen. I'm going to be clear on that.
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic answer, Shayle. I don't even want to try to top that or contribute to that, but I just want to say that I am a perfectionist, and this is a field where you need to accept, you're not going to do everything perfectly. It is it can be a very stressful field. I mean, I know Shayle and I this past fall were both working crazy hours, and you get criticisms left and right from, people who mean well. They want their citizens to be resilient and to have the support that they think they deserve and that they do deserve. And you're in 1,000 different directions, and it's, they're focused on their one community. I'm focused on the entire state of Oregon.
Right.
It's gonna look like you're dropping the ball, So yeah, I would agree with Shayle. Like, have compassion for yourself, learn those lessons, do the forward planning that you need to do prior to the incident. But yeah, have compassion, and there'll always be a next opportunity to do that.
And that was something, my mentor that I really appreciate about her is she's like, she really wants to push you to fail, and not to make that sound like she's setting you up to fail, but she wants to push you to a point of experiencing failure, whether that's through an exercise or maybe you have a task, and then she kind of celebrates it. She's like, cool, now you know how to learn the lesson and how to reframe. When you're in the middle of it, especially for people like Anna and myself that suffer with imposter syndrome and perfectionism, it's hard, but learning how to be okay with failure, I think, is key in this field, because it's going to happen, but there's always an opportunity to learn from it.
It's interesting that you brought up exercise, and we have about, I don't know, I guess 10 more minutes left, maybe 8 more minutes, so I can give David a chance to give his ending spiel. But it's interesting that you bring up the exercise, because exercise is a really great way to practice those skills. And I know that my first real life introduction into emergency management was actually through that live simulation through the Forage Center. And I had an experience where there was a complete failure. It wasn't just me, but it was my team. We completely failed to identify correct information. And it was day 3 of the simulation. So I was in it, and that was real to me. And when I realized the implications of that failure, it was horrifying to me. And that has stuck with me, even though that was a fake experience per se. It was real to me. And that has stuck with me forever. So those opportunities to fail in safe environments, I would put as, an advice to someone trying to enter the field of emergency management is seek out exercises or seek out opportunities to practice that failure in ways that don't have lasting impacts on the community, because you will learn so much from those failures.
And that was great, Chelsea. I also want to add, and something that I struggle with is urgency and balancing and managing everybody's differing urgencies. What is an urgency and what should be prioritized? So if I'm thinking about an emergency, top thing I should be prioritizing is life safety. Although this person might need this information, is it a life safety issue or can it wait till tomorrow, or can it wait a few hours, right? And so in the beginning of COVID, I was the sole Department of Human Services rep, mass care rep within public health, and I was trying to be everything to everybody. I was not managing, or I was not prioritizing the urgencies very well, because I just wanted to get people the information so that they could do their study or they could do this, right? And so, like, what is the life safety? What is the most important here? Life safety. Are you covering life safety? Yes. Can you take some quote unquote failure in a different area if it's not going to, you know, be a life safety issue? Yes, you could take like a few hours to respond to that, or, you know, take on some of that quote unquote failure.
And thank you, Anna. I'm sorry, I was distracted by reading a really interesting question from the chat box. And I'm going to try to get to everybody's questions, but I know that we're going to run out of time soon. This is a question from Mariana, asking for advice for non-American women on how to connect within the emergency management community. Any advice for that? And I know actually Jess, who is an attendee here, is connected to a Facebook group. So maybe Jess, you could drop in to the chat box, the Facebook group that you are connected with, of female emergency managers, for anyone who wants to make greater connections. But Anna and Shayle, I'll let you speak to this as well.
I you know, it's hard for me to answer as somebody who's from the US, but I guess my advice would be, if you have opportunities to, so I guess the way that I kind of got my experience outside of university was working through non-governmental organizations who work closely with emergency management, or I mean, I don't know if it's the same in Anna's world, but any kind of emergency management agency that I work with are always looking for opportunities on how they can engage volunteers or take on interns or anything like that, to help get experience. But I do know that there are a lot of Facebook groups out there. So if social media is your thing, I'm not a very good, I'm like the worst millennial when it comes to social media and stuff like that. So I can't name any off the top of my head, but I think anywhere that there's already networks in place is where I would probably seek out.
Yeah, I would agree. Another woman who was in the disaster resilience leadership program with us is Canadian, and I've heard a lot from her, some struggles she's had obtaining visas. You know, there's only certain organizations she can work with. So yeah, you might, you know, it might be just trying to get that visa or get into the country and then moving on to something that's a little bit more within your area of what you want to do. And I'm from the US as well, so I don't have a lot of great advice for you, but I know that I've heard this, and I know there are people out there that, you know, have done this, and that those groups probably are going to be the best advice givers for you.
And I see that people are putting things in the chat box about different groups that they're part of or know about, and that's great. If anybody has resources for greater connections in the field, post it in the chat box so that everybody can see it. And then we've got about 3 more minutes, so I'll ask, you know, another question. I just lost it. It was, this is kind of circling back to, Anna, your work with people with physical disabilities or other disabilities. You know, what is being done in the field or at the state or local level to ensure that folks who aren't physically able to seek refuge or evacuate in disaster, what's being done to support those folks? And Shayle, you maybe can speak at the community level as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I'm more at the 30,000 foot view, so I don't know a lot of the specifics of what's happening in each of these communities. But really, the purpose of this advisory council is to look at our processes. What sort of advice or guidance are we pushing out from the state level to the local level? During COVID, they helped us create an ADA guidance, and so it went over, you know, if you're setting up a COVID drive-through, what are some things that you should keep into account for people who are not able-bodied, people who, you know, deaf or hard of hearing, or blind, or, you know, can't sit in a car for a really long time, or, you know, are walking up, or, you know, all this spans the gamut of things that to consider that, you know, that gets sent out to all our emergency managers. also then encourages them to if you need an ADA assessment, let us know. If you know, giving that support system to those counties so that they can support their community members through this disaster. I don't have any specific examples, Shayle. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, so I actually really like the system that we set up here in our county. So when folks sign up for emergency alerts to receive alerts on their phone when something happens, we also ask them at that time if they have an energy dependency or a mobility restriction. And so what that does is it provides us with data to know where people are located. Not to sound like big brothery or anything, it's totally optional to provide this information. But it was really helpful during the fire because we were able to call people ahead of time. We had enough time to know what the next locations were that were going to be evacuated. And if they were somebody in the system that had a mobility restriction or an energy dependency, because for folks who aren't familiar with wildfire, when that happens, we cut off power in a lot of the areas, and it can be for an extended period of time for firefighter safety. So we actually worked with our United Way 211 partners and our volunteer agencies to just set up call centers where people called and said, hey, do you have what you need to get out? And if not, that's when we worked with EMS and other folks to help get people out. But those kind of considerations are put into place for sheltering. I know with our partners at the Red Cross, they will do pre-inspections of shelters to make sure that they are accessible for everybody. And then at our state level, they actually have access and functional needs coordinators. And so for folks who aren't familiar with the term access and functional needs, that's really a term used to describe any kind of need that somebody might have that prevents them from being able to take action in a life safety event. And so it's not necessarily the person themselves that's vulnerable. It's the fact that maybe there's a systemic or resource that's just not accessible because of some various reasons. For example, you would have an access and functional need if you don't get a message in Spanish if you don't speak English, right? That you're not inherently vulnerable. The system's not allowing you to access that resource. So that's kind of what we have at all of our levels.
Yeah, and through the Department of Human Services, our internal, like with our consumers, I know that when we have a level, you know, when we get into the evacuation levels, different communities, we would typically a level 2, which is, you know, the middle level, then let the continuity of operations program managers let them know so they can let the consumers know.
Sorry, I'm trying to give you the hook in a really subtle way.
But let me just wrap it up real quickly. It was brought to our attention that was not enough time for support systems to get into the area and get folks out that have a disability or have some sort of access to functional needs. So we actually started doing that once there was a flyover restriction, which gave them more time. So it's just like, it's a continuous thing trying to learn and you know, realize that your processes aren't actually helpful for people with disabilities.
Thank you so much to both of you for being available and answering all these questions. I want to encourage, I'm sure David will maybe reiterate this. You know, if you have any questions that weren't answered or you want to know want more information, I'm going to put my Forward Center email in the chat box. Feel free to send an email to me and to David. And we'll try to get back to you with some resources if that's what you're looking for.
So Chelsea, I'm really thinking we need to do a part 2. I'm sorry. This was phenomenal. It really was. And I think in some respects, you know, there's a lot that we can really delve into. In not only, I like the fact that Shayle and Anna were looking kind of at the 500-foot level, but the 50,000-foot level also is really important with this. So first of all, I want to thank Anna and Shayle. This has been wonderful. Thank you for spending an hour with us. It is really, your commitment to the field is really important, and your commitment to supporting others in the field is just incredible. And we really want to be part of that also. Thank you for Chelsea for moderating and having this conversation with your friends. I don't know, it probably was mentioned that Anna, Shayle, and Chelsea all went through the same graduate program at Tulane. So this conversation that I think is so important. So Shayle and Chelsea, and I think Anna put their emails in the box. So if people want to reach out to them, there's no way that we can get to all the questions. But this is recorded. This will be posted. It'll take us a few days. It'll be on, we have a YouTube channel. It'll be on our website, but you can also email Catherine@fordcenter.org to find out when it's posted. So once again, thank you all. We want to stop at 4 and respect people's time. I know Shayle and Anna are probably very busy. The work of emergency management doesn't stop just because there are no more fires in Colorado and Oregon. There are other things to do. So thank you for your time. I thank everybody for joining us today. And then I say good afternoon or good evening or good morning, wherever you are. This is David Smith from the Ford Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
So,